Okay, I think we're about ready to get started here. Welcome, everybody, to the session 4 of the RQAP exam study group for GLP. I'm Brendan Highland. I'm going to uh, uh, help us through this session today. But we also have uh, several other people here on the call, including Sherry Lee Dawson, Nina Sahay, and Melanie Willis.
I just want to chime in and say that I don't know if it was announced last, but the recordings for last week and this week will be posted by the end of this week, the start of next, simply just because Lydia is on vacation, a much deserved vacation. So she will get those posted once she's back from vacation.
Yes, we have to get your form so you can play volleyball.
It's tiny. I see that tiny.
Diane, just to let you know, we can hear you. So just in case something personal has been shared.
Sorry about that.
It's perfectly okay. We all have those moments. Just so you know, if in case something other conversation.
Got it. Thank you.
All right. Oh, we also have Hector and Laura also on, part of our
great.
faculty. So we're a full house on faculty today. So
Excellent. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome back. Welcome for the first time. If you haven't been to one of these study sessions before, I recognize a lot of the names, so I think most of you have are back for more. Is there anybody here that for whom this is their first study session? You can give a thumbs up or a raised hand, or you can chime in if you'd like. So this is very informal today. So if you have a question or anything, you can raise your hand or give a thumbs, or you can unmute and feel free to ask. Of course, I want to remind everybody that the more you participate, the more you'll get out of these. This is a study group that has been designed around discussion, and we've got some example questions that we can talk about. But if you've done your homework and you've come to us with more questions, please, we'd love to hear them and talk about anything that's come up. Last time I asked if anybody had taken any of the practice exams, and we did have a few people that had taken the practice exam already, which is great. That's a really good way to start to sort through maybe your strategy for dealing with the very large number of questions in a limited amount of time. So that is definitely recommended. I'm going to, like I did last time, I'm going to go quickly through a couple of slides on the exam, how the exam is set up and how these study sessions are set up, just as a reminder, because I think these are really important things to help you ensure your own success, is to be able to visualize and practice against what you might be expecting. So first of all, this is the fourth session. So today is about compliance assessment, auditing, and what to audit. Versus last week, we were looking at inspecting. So does anybody want to hazard a guess as to what we mean, what the difference between auditing and inspecting is? Quite often these two terms are used interchangeably, but in particular, if we're talking about auditing this week, and last week we were talking about inspecting, what do you think the difference might be?
Well, when this is Han. Yes, I'm thinking about when we audit something means that we have a piece of paper, data in front of us to audit versus inspect mean that the physically, that personally to go to the lab and look for information.
I like that answer quite a bit. Anybody else?
I would see inspection. I mean, this probably doesn't make sense, but like internal, like you can have a facility inspection, which can be an overall view of something, whereas an audit might be pinpointed, a deliverable base. But I think of inspection like I'm inspecting like the IT facility or the training facility or sample management. I'm looking at everything holistically, but I don't know if that makes sense. But I hear inspection when it comes to like facility inspections, critical phase inspections versus a data audit or an audit of a final report. Something.
Right. Yeah, I like that. I like that. So I mean, obviously, there's inspecting and auditing. We've seen them used sometimes interchangeably. We also know that some of the regulatory authorities use them in different ways. I've seen some people claim that the regulatory authorities talk about inspecting for what they do and auditing for what we do. But I think in terms of how we're studying today, we're again, that Hans' answer really hit that nail on the head. We're talking about auditing. Maybe it's paper, maybe it's on files, maybe it's but definitely something auditing something that is perhaps written down or in the records versus inspecting something physical where we're actually there in a place. So let's carry on here. Okay, so just to cover a few things like I promised, some logistics with the exam writing. As a reminder, this is going to be a long exam, right? 3.5 hours, 165 multiple choice questions where 15 are not scored, but you don't know which 15 are not scored. So that gives you about 1.5 minutes per question. So part of this your strategy for taking this exam is going to be figuring out what your best way to make sure you have time to answer every single question, right? The practice exam is now free, and we know that a couple of people here have taken the CRAP practice exam. We recommend doing so because it's going to give you an idea of how that timing is going to work. The exam covers the FDA, EPA, and OECD GLPs, as well as 21 CFR Part 11. And of course, there's a few OECD guidances that come up. The key ones to focus on are the study director, multi-site, and computerized systems. These are what we recommend that you focus on for these while you're studying. Why is that? Well, the OECD multi-site isn't covered by the American GLPs, so that's something that's a little bit different. They are, I think, as far as we know, pretty much standard practice across the GLPs, but the OECDs give you some hard and fast rules around dealing with multi-site studies. And of course, the role and responsibility of the study director and application to computerized systems are very important topics, especially lately. So read through all the suggested material, know the regulations. There's a candidate handbook that you should all have seen by now. There's also a reference to the preambles to the FDA GLPs. Now, these will help you understand the expected interpretation. Last week, we had a really great question about those preambles, and that was specifically, are there any any digital copies of the preambles that are not just scanned in slightly blurry and yellowed versions of the original papers? And the answer is no, there are no freely available versions of those. However, the timing is really great because in September, September 24th and 20, no, when is that? Where have I've lost the my link to that. Just a second. In September, in the Quality College that's coming up, there is a course specifically on the preambles. And in that course, they will be going through the each of the preambles, why they are useful, and how you can use them. So that's something that that might help you if you're really worried about those. I know that the course also will give you some useful materials, including, I think, some digital versions of at least part of the preambles. So that's something that you might want to take a look at. But at this, on the other hand, you can certainly just read through the preambles that have been that are available, but those are not necessarily the best quality scans. So finally, answer the questions based on the most conservative approach, right? These are not necessarily how you're going to do things in your company. Take the most conservative approach, assuming that the regulations are taken as literally as possible, okay? There are a lot of questions, not a lot of time, so read through them, each question carefully, right? And the exam mechanism is going to allow you to come back to any questions you've skipped. So if it looks like it's really long or complicated, then just skip it. Your first time through, go through all the questions that you can answer as really quickly and confidently. Right? Watch your time. After the first hour, you should be through about 50 to 55 questions. So pace yourself and then go back to those long questions after you've gone through all the really quick questions, because the mechanism is going to allow you to pinpoint anything you've skipped, right? If you're unsure after you've gone through them, guess, because a wrong answer is the same as no answer. So at least you might have gotten that. And I see a hand up from Sherry.
Yeah, I believe that the system allows you to actually flag things. So if there's one that you're not 100% sure and you're like, I'm just going to tick B and I'll come back to it later if I have more time, you can do that. So it's not just the ones that you decide to like, that's too long, I'm just going to fly by and come back to it later. So it does have the capacity to flag. So it does, basically how you put those little stars of when you were doing it on the paper, for those of us who've written it eons ago, you can flag it.
That's excellent. That's an excellent point, because that allows you to actually guess at an answer, but then come back at the end to the flagged ones to rethink whether that guessed answer is the right one. And you'll see in some of these practice questions, sometimes sometimes you might be presented with two options and maybe only a small clue in the question as to which one might be the expected answer, right? Keywords, right? Those keywords in the answer, that's exactly what I was just talking about. They're going to allow you to be able to tell maybe whether they're asking from the perspective of the FDA, the EPA, or the OECD. And some of those keywords might be things like study plan versus protocol, or reference or control article versus substance versus item, and things like that. These are all hints that will point to which milieu you're talking about. Right? And apply logic. Most questions have two answers that are clearly incorrect, and that will help you. Now, if you were here for Melanie's really good presentation a couple of a couple of weeks ago on your she covered some exam taking styles and learning styles. You might want to decide whether it's better for you to cancel the clearly incorrect ones or to decide which ones are clearly correct first, because different people will be quicker at those two different strategies. Okay, before we go on, are there any other questions around the exams, what the exam entails, or the learning materials? Okay. Well, let's go on with today's topic. So it's compliance assessment, auditing, and what to audit, right? So here today, we're really looking at the records. So what are we going to audit? Protocols or study plans, amendments, and deviations, including the associated documentation. SOPs, revisions, and deviations, including the associated documentation. Reporting structure of the organization and personnel qualifications, including curriculum vitae, job descriptions, and training records. Equipment verification and/or validation, including the associated documentation. Computer system development, verification, validation, release, maintenance, and retirement processes, including the associated documentation. Now, before we move on, I'm just looking at items 1 and 2 here. If you're inspecting or auditing something and you find that there is a problem that is a problem in the that doesn't meet what the SOPs require, but it does meet what the protocols require, what are you going to what's going to take precedence? The protocol, the SOPs, or the GLPs? Anybody?
I would say protocol.
Right. Now, hopefully, all of these would they wouldn't contradict each other unless it's important to the protocol, right? And one of the things that we do is we inspect the protocol to make sure that it actually meets the requirements of the GLPs.
Right.
But the protocol always takes precedence, right? Over any SOPs or anything like that, because your protocols are what defines what you're going to do in the study. Now, again, one of the things we want to make sure is that we're not contradicting, right? Unless there's a very good reason to. But the protocol always comes first, even if it's written in an SOP. Okay, let's carry on. Test article, control and reference material characterization. Here's a big topic. Dosing mixtures, concentrations, stability analyses, and/or homogeneity analyses, including data, reagents, and associated documentation. Okay. Analytical method validation and documentation. Chain of custody documentation. For example, you're shipping and receiving records for specimens and samples, and I'm sure also for test and control articles too. Data traceability, for example, your electronic and paper traceability. Certificates of analysis and associated documentation. Final reports, right? Including the contributing scientists reports, phase reports, amendments and compliance exceptions, and/or GLP compliance statements. Accountability records for test, control, and reference item materials, including records for preparation, administration, transfer, and disposal. Test system randomization documentation. Equipment maintenance, calibration, and repair records. Temperature, humidity, and other environmental control records. Study documentation, for example, raw data and records around that. right? Including both electronic and paper documentation. Data calculations, including transformations, transcriptions, and derivations. For example, statistical analyses and summary tables, how you actually get the data into there. You want to make sure that those are being QC'd properly by the study groups, or by the study personnel. Archival processes and other authorized access and tracking of records. Animals, test system history, receipt, health, quarantine, maintenance, and disposal records. Study director and scientist notes, including memos related to the study, including records documenting unforeseen circumstances, assessment of study impact on things. Findings and responses to quality assurance unit inspections. So these are all the kinds of records that we expect to be able to see as we're auditing a study or a facility. Do we have any questions brought up around these things to audit?
Yes.
Yes.
So for a protocol that was sponsored by another company, so if when we audited, the sponsor signature was after the study director signed, was that a deviation from the, is it a compliant issue? Because
Is
the
it a
protocol
compliance
signed
issue?
after the study director signature.
So I guess that raises a bunch of other questions, does it not? Like, was the protocol changed between the time that the study director signed it and the sponsor signed it?
Mm-hmm.
I guess, why don't we reframe that first? What is required in the GLPs in terms of a protocol signature? What's required in the FDA GLPs? Let's start with that.
Do people want to just shout out their answer or type it in the chat? Again, this isn't it's not a teaching session, it's a discussion. So the more you discuss, the more you'll get out of the session. So we do have Ashton who's responded with a quote, but date of the approval of the protocol by the sponsor and the dated signature of the SD.
Hector's got his hand up.
Yeah, so for a question like this, what I would do is step back and think about the basics, right? Like let's always go back to the basics. First, I would ask the question, what is the role of the sponsor, or what is the significance of the sponsor signature? So under FDA GLPs, we know that the sponsor is the one who approves the protocol, right? And then what is the significance of the signature of the study director? So under the FDA GLPs, the signed or the dated signature of the study director marks the initiation of the study, right? So those are the things that you would want to think about when looking at a question like this.
So the sponsor doesn't actually have to sign, but the regs do require that the protocol includes the date of approval. So if that signature that you're talking about was indicating their approval, then you would have a deviation, a GLP deviation. However, if you had the date of approval and an email or something else to back that up, then you would be okay. Because there's nothing that says they can't sign, but they don't have to.
Yes, so for thank you, Laura. Laura's exactly right. So I will give an example in terms of what we do at my company. we have that date indicated. We are a CRO, so certain sponsors still like to have that signature. That's their internal processes, and that's fine. The study director will sign after we have that approval date. So the approval date is indicated, and the sponsor will sign, but essentially it's what we call in the regulated field a vanity signature, because it has no requirement under the regulations. So it can be added after, as long as you have those regulatory requirements. However, like Laura said, if that signature is noting approval, then you violated the FDA GLPs. So does that answer your question?
And that's because the study director has signed the initiation of the study before all the components were in, right?
Correct.
But again, that vanity signature sometimes takes time to get. And so I think this is why a lot of people want to separate when's the date of approval versus when does the signature come in.
Right. So to Brendan's point, so if you see study director's dated signature happening before the approval, then you might have an issue there. So like I said, going back to the basics, what are the roles of, or what do those dated signatures mean, right? So step back, think about the basics, and you answer accordingly.
I hope that answered your question. I'd like to just jump back. Ashton did raise the question a few minutes ago. Sorry, whoever asked that question, I've lost track of who asked it, but did that answer your question?
Yes.
Perfect.
Thank you. Yes. Yes.
All right. So Ashton did have a question in the chat, so I'll just read that aloud. So can we discuss the definition or term use of formulation versus characterization as it is applied to the GLPs? So who can what does everyone think the difference is between formulation and characterization?
To me, this is Han. Yeah, formulation means that the test article is mixing with a vehicle, and with that combination will be dose to the animal. That I'm consider formulation. Characterization means that the test article, it go through the test to identify, to ideate and to determine the purity by itself, but it's just a test article.
All right, so that's thank you, Han, for that. Lau's entered characterization is after the formulation is done to prove the content. Sure, however, in the regulations, I think characterization is built more around the test article or test item specifically. So the bulk product that you're actually that's under the investigation of the study. So you want to know the chemical makeup, the purity, the active ingredient, and all those fun, typically GMP characteristics. However, I guess you could use characterization in terms of formulation, but you would want to definitely make sure you're stipulating formulation characterization. Typically the formulation, it just needs to be analyzed to ensure it's at the right concentration, it was prepared correctly, and that you have the stability, and if it's a suspension, that it's homogeneous.
I think the one of the things to bring forward here is that the GLPs don't actually talk about formulation. We tend to talk about dose formulation because that's something that happens quite often in the studies. But the GLPs specifically talk about characterization of, as Sherry pointed out, the test and control article, right? So that's that is the study director assuring that that what they're testing is exactly what they say that they're going to test, right?
So I have another question related to test article. For example, for the test article that we purchased from another vendor and we receive the C of A, when we receive it on site, we are not doing, we only ID it to make sure it's okay, but we are not doing the testing to determine purity because we rely on the value on the C of A. So the question is, if we use it under the GLP, will the study director have to write a compliant statement because we are not using the material for the GLP, but it tested under GMP?
So we need to be careful here. So what we want to do in this study group is to study the regulations in terms of how they're going to be interpreted for the exam, right? In the strictest purpose. So this might be different from how your company might do things. If you are doing if you're talking about a study that's done under the OECD GLPs, then there are some discussions about what to do if you're using, something like a C of A under GMPs, that was produced under GMPs as part of your characterization. But that would be part of your characterization. And I recommend reading the OECD document on test and reference item characterization to see some of that discussion. But I think in a strict sense, the GLPs do want study directors to make sure that characterization has been performed under the GLPs to the satisfaction of the study director.
Okay.
Now, it's been a while since I've read them, but I think that the FDA FAQs do discuss characterization as well. Has anybody looked at that recently? Anybody remember exactly what the FAQs say about characterization?
I know that the expectation has always been that test article characterization has to be done per GLPs. Now, it is a different issue, and we've discussed this a lot of times, at SQA with regards to any claims of GMP for test article characterization. And we probably don't want to dwell on that for this purposes right now, for the study group. But bottom line is the expectation really is that test article characterization must be done per the GLPs.
Now, when you're talking about the reference or control article that might be coming off the shelf because you're using it as a comparator, then that opens up other possibilities.
Yeah.
Right. But the test article usually is something that isn't already on the shelf, right? So there are some stricter expectations for characterization there.
Thank you.
For our purposes, we want to answer the exam questions as strictly as possible. So in most cases, your answer is going to be characterization done per GLPs, right? And that would include stability, stability under the test conditions. It's going to include proving the identity and strength of the of what you've received on site, not just what was produced at another site, right? So.
And mind you, this is not to say that this is not being done. Like we've seen a lot of cases where there's a claim that test articles were characterized under GMP. But if you notice, there's also a lot of documents out there, or a lot of protocols and reports that have GLP exception statements when it comes to test article characterization being done per the GMPs. But you know. But like I said, for this purposes, um, uh, we should really stick to what the regulation state, or what the expectation is with regard to test article characterization, and that is per GLP.
Okay. Let's move on. Now, I think last time I've got a few discussion questions here, but I think last time there were several comments saying that the quiz questions were really very helpful. So let's start with the example quiz questions we have prepared for you here today. Okay. Sample exam question number 1. The protocol for a study says to document color, clarity, and whether there is particulate matter for an extract of test articles. Upon review of the worksheets for the test article preparation and documentation for extraction, only color and clarity were documented. What should be done? Select 1. A. Go back and write in the data that particulate matter was not documented at the time. However, it was clear because if it wasn't clear, some description of the particulate matter would have been written. B, have a technical review of the emission by the study director and management and document that in the raw data. C, have the study director assess the emission and write a deviation to the protocol in the data and the final report. And D, go find the technician that did the extraction and ask if he or she remembers whether there was particulate matter. If the technician remembers, have them document what the technician remembers. All right, discussion time. Yes, Sherry.
Okay, so first of all, for anyone who's on the call that hasn't taken the practice exam, these questions are directly from it. So if you haven't taken it and you wanted to basically try it to see how where you sit in that, you may not want to listen in on this portion just because that we will be reviewing the answer. So I just want to give you the heads up of that. If you've already taken the practice exam, hopefully you already know the right answer, and this will just be a helpful discussion. Just wanted to just throw that warning out so you don't go to do the quiz and then we're like, well, this isn't testing. We already did these ones. I know what the answer is.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert, exactly.
Okay. So let's see. We've got 3 people saying their answer is C. 4 people saying their answer is C.
Would anyone like to share why they think C is the answer?
Yeah, because let's see, upon review of the worksheet for test articles, documentation for extraction, only color and clarity were documented. I think that C is the best because it was omitted and you can't really go off of memory what was actually seen. And so that's kind of, I don't want to say a lost cause, but at that point it is, I think, a deviation, and the study director should assess the impact of like that emission. That's my view.
And absolutely. And if you look at all the choices, right? C is the only one that mentioned deviation. And this is clearly a protocol deviation, right? So when you see something like this when you see something in the question text that clearly points to a deviation. I think that's sort of the first thing to look for. Which answer actually mentions deviation, right?
Right. That's what stood out to me, the deviation.
So everybody got this correct. That's great.
Okay, I just
yeah.
to play devil's advocate, why
Right.
wouldn't A be an appropriate one?
Because if you didn't document it, then it didn't happen.
Good answer. Yes. So it says the protocol says to document color, clarity, and whether there is particulate matter. So if there's not, you can't not document, right? So if you say, well, I'm only going to document if there's particulate matter, which answer one seems to be the sort of rationale why, going back to our GLPs, if it's not documented, it's not done, right? So you need positive documentation for your protocol requirement. So good answer. Just
It's part of that Alcoa Plus, right? The your records need to be contemporaneous with when the data was taken. All right, moving on. Question 2. A study plan describes the requirements of transfer of blood samples to a freezer maintained at below -20 degrees C immediately after collection and subsequently to a freezer maintained at -80 plus or -5 degrees C for long-term storage. At the time of transferring the samples from -20 to the -80 freezer, the study director noticed the temperature of the -20 was above -20 degrees C. What action should the study director take to maintain the integrity of study results? Should they A, document in the data, B, amend the study plan and change the initial storage temperature, C, document the deviation with possible impact, D, inform the study sponsor, no documentation required? All right. Also C, yes. I think we've got everybody coming back with C again. That's document the deviation with possible impact. Anybody want to hazard an explanation as to why C is the most appropriate?
I think similar to the previous question, instead of protocol, we have study plan. So I can't exactly point to the exact sections in OECD, so I'm not as familiar. I'm more familiar with FDA, but it's the same concept that there was a deviation that occurred from what the study plan required.
Right. So that's great. I really liked hearing that you picked up on those clues. A, it says study plan, so we're talking OECD. And B, the study plan said one thing and what actually happened was something else. So that's a deviation. So those two clues should push you to answer C. That is fantastic. Great. And here we bring up also the part in the FDA GLPs that says determine no deviations from approved protocols occur without proper authorization and documentation. In the OECD principles, it is section 1.1.22E, study director's responsibilities. That includes that ensuring any deviations have been documented and appropriate corrective actions have been taken if necessary. Okay, question 3. A test facility conducts a GLP test substance characterization study. So this ties into our discussions earlier on today. The analytical reference standard is furnished by a supplier with a certificate of analysis confirming identity and purity. The study director conducts the study and completes the report with the reference standard as supplied. Considering the GLP requirements for test substance characterization, which best describes the most appropriate course of action? A. Analytical reference standards do not require characterization prior to their use in a GLP in a study. B. The lack of a GLP characterized analytical reference standard must be included as an exception on the GLP compliance statement of the final report. C. The test facility QAU must audit the data for the certificate of analysis from the supplier to be compliant. D. Test facility management must approve the use of an analytical reference standard that has not been characterized under GLP for test substance characterization studies to be compliant. Okay. So we have 2 people guessing B so far, and Ashton says B or D. Interesting. We have B or C up here. Yeah, okay. Okay, so the people who are confident that it's B, why would you say that it is definitely B? Anybody?
My my first clue is the GLP test substance. It just clue is from EPA.
Right.
Yes, but EPA and GLP EPA versus FDA GLP, they are similar. So therefore, with that, that's the one real clue, but it doesn't help here. However, B, because with the discussion earlier on, that I'm confident this is the right choice because the characterization have to be performed under the GLP. But it is not, then it is a compliant issue, but they will be addressed in the final report.
Okay. So again, playing devil's advocate. So why not C or D? Does auditing the data for the certificate of analysis from the supplier make the GLP characterization compliant? Does that create?
That's a GMP requirement.
Does sound like a GMP
It
requirement.
is, yep, that's a GM. C is a GMP requirement.
And how about D?
I would disagree with that. I wouldn't
Yeah.
necessarily say it's a GMP requirement. QA must approve it for a GMP
Oh,
to be
I'm sorry,
appropriate.
you're right, Sherry. They approve the C of A.
But I think C alludes to what I was typing in response to Ashton's question. I think C alludes to the fact that some companies think that if we don't do anything GLP, but then QA audits the data at the end, we can now call it GLP. And that's I think a misnomer that, oh, we'll just QA will audit it and then it's GLP. So I think that's what C is alluding to, which we know that just because QA audits the data doesn't make the work GLP.
Very good point. I did not, yeah.
And
yes, thanks, Ashton. Can't audit compliance into the data. Exactly.
right. We have no access to how the vendor did their test, and that may or may not be the case, but usually that's absolutely true. We also can't really peer into history except through records, right? So we can't prove at any point in time. We can't make what they did in the past at another facility GLP, right? And so from the strictest interpretation here, it's not GLP. I think something that that was brought up before about the fact that it's test substance characterization points to EPA. That's another clue, because this GLP compliance statement in capitals is definitely an EPA thing, I think, as far as I understand. It is commonly used in the other GLPs, but this is, from a regulatory perspective, defined in the EPAs. Am I correct here? Yeah, so 160.12 actually asks for a statement of compliance or non-compliance. So that's a very particular EPA thing, whereas the FDA GLPs don't talk about a statement of compliance.
Can I add to that though, Brendan? So
Mm.
the FDA GLPs do not, but when submitting, the reason we do it, right? The why that a lot of facilities still do it is because the sponsor still is required to generate a compliance statement in the submission that they provide when submitting the data for GLP studies to the FDA. So a compliance statement still is generated when submissions occurred. It's just from the sponsor. And so why you may see that FDA GLP facilities doing the work may include those or will include them in their final report is to support the sponsor.
Mhm.
Just to answer the why.
Okay, any further questions? Here, oh, I'm going to just bring up the answer here. Of course, they refer to the EPA GLPs, specifically calling for reference substance characterization.
Now, would there be a different answer if it was actually a question under OECD? What does anybody think? Do you think it'll be the same one?
I guess it would be the same. I haven't read to that part yet, but
I would say under OECD, D would be the more appropriate one, because when you go through the OECD principles and some of the guidance, especially concerning test item, it does stipulate that sponsors should be aware that failure to characterize according to GLP may be an issue in some countries. So not all countries have that as an issue and don't necessarily require a GLP compliance exception. So, however, it's test facility management's responsibility to ensure that test items are characterized. So I would say under OECD, D would probably be the more appropriate response. Does anyone agree or disagree?
I agree with that, Sherry.
So that's why this actually is a really great question, because as you all focused in on, it was test substance, so that hopefully rang your alert. This is EPA, and you go to those regulations. For the most part, FDA GLPs, EPA GLPs, the two, and OECD are I'd say 80 to 90% similar, but there are some subtle differences, and that would be one of them.
I think in terms of my reasoning for that, specifically the OECD's the OECD's actually put the responsibility for test and reference item characterization on the test facility management. So if your clues pointed to this being an OECD thing, then I agree. It would probably be D, especially because, again, the OECDs do not talk about anything about a GLP compliance statement either, right? So I think that those clues would point you towards D in that case. But again, it is a little, you kind of have to play that. Okay, so what is the strictest interpretation based on these clues, right? Okay, we've got about 4 minutes left. We can move on to the next question quickly, unless anybody has any other questions that they'd like us to discuss quickly. Anybody? Okay, let's go. A shipment of animal feed to be mixed with the test materials was received. Upon completion of the study, it was noted that the feed had expired during the study. Which of the following is most appropriate? A, reanalyze the feed and retain a sample. B, invalidate all studies using the feed. C, acknowledge the deviation in the final report. And D, dispose of the remaining supply and document the amount. All right, we have an early answer. We go C and B. Okay, we've got 2 for C. Any other votes? C, very good. Okay. All right, so B, invalidate all studies using the feed. Or C, acknowledge the deviation in the final report. Anybody want to discuss why they chose? Well, first of all, why would you choose B? Okay, anybody want to hazard a guess as to choosing C then?
Because it might not have had impact on the study, so you don't want to just invalidate it. But you do want to acknowledge that you deviated by using expired feed. That would be my guess.
That answer does, the answer in C, I should say, does feel like it's a bit incomplete, doesn't it? That just acknowledging the deviation doesn't seem like it's quite enough.
Right. I mean, I would think they should dispose of everything personally, but I didn't know which one would be best.
I think that from my point of view, the regulations require the deviation to be acknowledged in the final report, right? And at that acknowledgement, you'd have the study director also required. The study director should be assessing the impact on the study. And maybe some of these other options might be the corrective action that leads from that assessment. But none of them are actually required by the regulations. Does that make sense?
Yes, I would think that, I mean, definitely C, but I would say that you would have to almost reanalyze that feed in order to make your impact assessment. But again, C is the one thing that's required.
I would say also the question isn't necessarily complete, right? So it says a shipment of animal feed which need to be mixed with the test materials was received. And upon completion, it was noted that the feed had expired during the study. What does that mean during the study? If it's 28 days study and it expired on the 27th day, does that mean your first 27 days are invalid? What if it expired on your first day or the day before your first day of dosing or treatment? So there's a lot unknown there. So it's an absolute deviation. And now would you say this is a deviation to SOP, protocol, or GLPs?
That's a great question. Anybody? SOP, protocol, or GLPs?
SOP.
Ah, anybody else?
So I think we would also need to know if for some strange reason your protocol had that information, that detailed information in it, then it could be protocol.
Okay, and we have a
And-
response GLP.
Yep. And then, well, I'll let her say why it's GLP.
I would say SOP, because if it's an animal facility, then I assume they have a lot of documentation and SOPs for animal feed and how it should be utilized and when it should be thrown out, all that.
Absolutely. But remember our discussion previously, the hierarchy of documents, right? So your SOPs, your protocol is higher than your SOPs, and your GLP is king, right? GLPs, the regulations, you can't design your protocol to surpass the GLPs, right? So as Ashton listed, 58.133C is your requirement that the feed needs to be analyzed and appropriate for the animals and not to interfere, right? So if it's expired, it could be interfering. So I with this, yeah, mixtures of articles with carriers.
So I just wanted to clarify something on that hierarchy. One of the reasons, when you're right, you cannot use your protocol to get around a GLP requirement or use your SOPs to get around a GLP requirement. However, if your protocol says that something is required that would be against the GLPs, even if you change the procedure on the fly in order to do the right thing and follow the GLPs rather than the protocol, it's still a protocol deviation because your protocol said to do the bad thing. Now, hopefully, if you catch that, you will amend the protocol so it doesn't continue to be a deviation. However, that's why we usually say that the protocol always trumps your SOPs and the GLPs, because if it said to do it in the protocol and you didn't do it, even if by not doing it you were doing the right thing, it's still a protocol deviation. Does that make sense? But as Sherry said, the GLPs trump everything. You cannot use the protocol as an excuse to not follow the regulations.
And this is also, especially under the context of the US FDA GLPs. In the US, the GLPs have the force of law.
Yes.
So.
All right, so we should probably go to the answer because we are past time and
Okay.
probably finish it up with that.
Thanks, everybody. We've had a great discussion this time.
Thank
If
you.
you have any further questions or things you want to discuss for our next session, when these slides go up, there's another example question. There's also some other discussion topics that you could address as well. But anyway, for now, this is thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
All right.
Al.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.